Welcome, everybody. We're going to give it a few more minutes here. Then we're going to get going with our topics. It's going to be a really great show. I say show. It's always a show. All right, got more people joining. Feel free to add closed caption. Good question. Can I add closed caption? Yeah, so that's one thing. If you have any questions or you want to introduce yourself, please utilize the chat box there, and we'll make sure to check on that as we go. Let me make sure these captions are working. Show captions. There we go. Okay. I've actually never done captions before. That's a really cool feature here. All right, we're gonna let a few more people jump on. It is 10 o'clock now, so welcome to the Coffee and Series. It's the one for February, the second one of the year for 2024. Make sure you get your coffee or your tea. I'm drinking tea, so that's what I like to drink. So make sure that you have your comments ready, your questions ready. We've got our chat box here. Linda is a community member, huge fan of the topic. So we're going to get into some really cool stuff. As we said, we're going to try to keep it to an hour 15, understanding, keeping everybody's time in mind and being mindful of that. But we do have a lot of cool things to talk about. So I'm just going to get into it without further ado. I'll introduce the panel here in a minute. I'm just going to slide this out of the way so we don't get too distracted. Keep the captions up on here, and we'll just go ahead and get started. And as people approach or get on board and join the room, I will be letting them in. So if I miss anybody, just interrupt me and shout it out. Excuse me. So this is a presentation of the Allen County Soil and Water Conservation District, and our key focus, the main thing we love to talk about, is soil health principles. These are the 4 soil health principles that we speak to all the time. We do add on another principle when it comes to larger farms, and that is integrated grazing and integrated animals into the system as well. So keeping all these main focuses in mind, we will continue on and get into our topic. Quick reminder, we have all the way from Ohio. Hello. We have our native plant sale going on right now. Our native plant sale is going on through Riverview Nursery and goes on now. We need to have all the orders and payments into the office by April 12th. But then we're going to go to Bloomingdale Gardens and distribute the orders as ordered. And this is what you'll see. These are the 4 kits that we have available. You'll get 12 plugs in each one of these kits. Short and showy is the new kit that we added on. So it's shorter plant height. So we can start there and then build up your height profile in your garden from there. And then just so you're aware, all the species are due to substitution, depending on availability. And keep that in mind. I introduce our panelists real quick, and they're also going to introduce themselves here in a minute once we get into the questions. So we have guest panelists, all forms, and everybody. They're all very, very knowledgeable in all different areas. Martha Ferguson, Marissa Renz, Sean Nolan, and Freya Burns. Let me get this out of the way. There we go. So you can see everything. Okay, sorry. So you can see everything that everybody does there. Just a little bit about what they do and their background. And again, they're going to introduce themselves a little further and tell you about what they have going on currently and things that they're excited about themselves. So, what is a pollinator? Right? This is our topic today. And I just want to make sure everybody knows it's not just the bees and the hummingbirds. A lot of people just think, oh yeah, bees, great. And we're all learning and growing, and everybody learns and grows. I learned recently that it's not just bees and hummingbirds and myself. So don't feel embarrassed or ashamed if you didn't know that. If you didn't know that flies are, oops, sorry. What am I doing? Sorry. Flies are pollinators as well. So they go from flower to flower and help pollinate as well. So we've got a whole bunch of insects and creatures that work together with nature and have fully evolved with these plants, excuse me, to help the ecosystem. And I say fully evolved because they are pretty specific to different regions, just like we have native plants. We also have native pollinators that go along with the native plants. So keep that in mind as well as we go through this. Pollinators worldwide, there are 200,000 different species worldwide, and 90% of plants depend on pollinators. And transfer that over to, we need plants to breathe, right? So if 90% of the plants depend on pollinators and we depend on plants, that kind of translates to we depend on the pollinators as well. So what they do for us, I mean, helps everything from wildlife to obviously plants, all the way to healthy watersheds and beyond. So we definitely need to protect and keep pollinators in mind. And the biggest danger, we'll get into that here in the next slide, but the biggest danger to pollinators right now is loss of habitat. We're talking about in North America alone, bats, bees, butterflies, beetles, wasps, small mammals, all of these are actually pollinators, and we should be looking to protect them and not keep them away from our yards and our properties. I mean, they were there first, I think. And just for bees alone, there's over 4,000 native species of bees in North America. Yeah, I know honeybees are not native to North America, but they're very, very beneficial. Yeah. So, there are some endangered species that Indiana has different organizations throughout Indiana work to get them off the endangered species lists. So DNR has restored several species since 2022, and their work expands more than 2022. But in 2022, they were able to restore the Indiana bat, the osprey, red knot, and freshwater mussels. Their efforts are very much appreciated. So these are the different threats to pollinators that we see in our day and age today. Number one being climate change. There's a lot of different data coming in now about habitat loss and other types of loss due to climate change that is threatening our pollinator species. We see also things like diseases and viruses brought on by degraded food sources, loss of all these kind of intermix and kind of fall into each other. So due to pathogens, there is an increase in diseases or viruses due to pesticide use. There's more, increase in loss of habitat. So they all kind of threaten each other, and they add on and multiply into each other and just threaten our species all over the place. So the cultural perception of clean, neat, and tidy, we need to have manicured, clean lawns. These are also threats to pollinators, because pollinators utilize, in the wintertime, they utilize in nature. They utilize everything that falls down to the ground, and they protect themselves, and that's their habitat. So if we keep it neat and tidy, that's a mindset or a perception that we need to be careful about. We're thinking about our pollinator species and our threats to everything, to global impact, climate change. So these are some of the resources and organizations that are working to bring back the pollinators. Different things that we could do on our own, small scale and large scale, and we go all the way up to city, county, big scale, large scale, businesses all over the place. Think about all the businesses that have massive amounts of manicured cut lawns and all of the money that could be saving by not needing to cut all of those grass blades every week or every other week during the summertime. Avoiding chemicals, avoiding pesticides, herbicides, lessen soap runoffs, trying to use more biodegradable soaps, things like that. So planting some of the plant families to keep in mind to help out the pollinators. We've got our sunflowers, our coneflowers, our goldenrods, our asters, and many, many more. So there's a lot of different ways to support pollinators in your yard, around your gardens, and in your farms, on your farms as well. Then I will come back to some more of the resources here in a minute. So before we get into our questions, this is just some of the terminology to keep in mind that kind of gets either overused or misused or confused when we're talking about nature, gardening, anything to do with horticulture at all. So pests versus pollinators. We call a lot of things pests when they're actually pollinators. And you're like, oh, we don't want to we don't want to attract the wasp. We don't want to attract they also have a really, really important role to play for pollinating. Native versus naturalized, aggressive versus invasive, alien or non-native versus introduced, dirt versus soil. That's a really big one. We love talking about dirt versus soil. And one word that's really important to keep in mind is weed. What is a weed, right? Is basically anything that you don't want any plant that's growing where you don't want it to grow. So depending on your mindset, any type of vegetation could be a weed. So for me, grass is a weed because I don't like it. I don't like it growing where it's growing, and so I'd like it gone. But over here in this picture, you'd see kudzu, the weed that ate the South, right? It's also edible. It's something else you can keep in mind. It's some of these aggressive, invasive plants and trees do also have medicinal and other beneficial benefits. They're edible as well. So there are other plants that their virtues have not yet been discovered. They could be used as medicinal or edible, but we just don't know yet, right? So those may be considered weeds as well. It's really interesting search, the federal noxious weed list going on there, and actually knowing what you know, knowing what everybody knows. Like I said before, some of these are edible, some of these are not. So it's really interesting to see what is actually listed as a federal noxious weed in comparison to other data that's out there as well. It's pretty interesting. So before we get into our panel questions, this is basically our main topic, and I'd like our panelists to kind of jump on the screen here and talk about who they are and their passion real quick before we jump in. But basically, the question that we want to focus on, the main question is, how as a homeowner can we support biodiversity and increase native plants within the landscape, knowing what we just talked about pollinators and the importance that they have. So if our panelists could go one by one, let me see if I can get this larger here. So, if our panelists could go one by one and introduce themselves before we get into it.
I'm Martha Ferguson. I own Riverview Native Nursery. I've been selling native plants since 2012. I've been gardening with them since the 1990s.
Thank you, Martha.
Good morning.
Good morning. Sean, how about you?
Yes, I am.
Yes,
My name's Sean Nolan. I am the president of the Northeast chapter of the Indiana Native Plant Society, as well as owner of native landscape design and installation company called Sanctuary Native Landscapes.
Thank you, Sean. Marissa, how about you?
Hi, I'm Marissa Renz. I own Plant Happiness, which is a consulting and design company here in Fort Wayne. I teach a sustainable gardening course at Purdue Fort Wayne, and I focus a lot on ecology and pollinators, which is really great, and birds, water and soil also. And I also teach individual spring gardening classes, which are starting here in March.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And last but not least, Freya, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi. Yeah, I'm Freya Bernson. I serve as the stewardship chair for the Northeast chapter of the Indiana Native Plant Society. I currently am a ecological restorationist for Blue Heron Ministries. I also have worked for a number of other land trusts and ecological restoration companies in the past, and do that kind of work as a hobby as well. And yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So we're just going to go ahead and get started with our questions here. And I'll kind of slide you guys out the way, but I'll bring you back on screen as we answer these questions. So again, our focus is how as a homeowner can we support biodiversity? And that's any type of landowner, excuse me, farm owner or anything like that, manager of any type in your workspace. So if you have any sort of influence at all, these are great ways to try to advocate for pollinators. So our first question here, are urban area soils a concern for native plants? And follow up, what are some soil amendments that may be needed before planting natives? So we'll go ahead and get into that. Does anybody want to start off and tackle either one of these questions?
Yeah,
Okay. Go ahead.
I knew that was going to happen.
You need to call on us.
I will, Mark. I will. Yeah, I was trying it out, see what was going to happen.
Urban area soils would be a concern only if you were in a brownfield. Native plants are pretty adaptable to any type of soils, and some are salt tolerant, and maybe a soil test, a soil test would be recommended in case there's something of concern. And I advocate not amending your soil. That amended soils are often too rich for our native plants that grow well in our clay soils. So if you pick the right plant for the right place, that's a soil and water saying, right? Right plant in the right place, you don't need to amend it. But if you're going to put something that only grows in loam in your hard clay, then I would probably suggest a planter.
Okay. Okay. Marissa, or Freya, I think one of you or both of you were going to say something as well. Marissa, did you want to start?
Yeah, I was just going to offer that I think maybe one of the problems with our local soil can be with people who live in new developments, and so oftentimes their soil is very compacted because of all the work that's been done. So that I think sometimes can be a little bit more problematic in terms of what to choose and knowing what to choose, which Martha has a great selection of plants that work well in compacted soil. So I think sometimes it's maybe not necessarily the type of soil that we have, but the quality of the soil, especially post-development or construction.
Freya, anything to add to that?
No. Yeah, the only thing I would add, I mean, often people advocate mulch and for new plantings and stuff, and that is I mean, whether you look at that as a amendment or not, I tend to, I mean, I don't know, do recommend, you know, people consider mulching when they do put in native plugs just to manage weeds, but that'd be it. Like everybody else said, you know, native plants really thrive in nutrient poor environments, so less amendments are better.
And Sean,
might-
did you have? Yes,
Yeah,
please.
I might just add, just real quick, and I think Martha and Marissa really hit on it. It's really about the right plant in the right place. So, you know, when we're talking about native plants, what I find difficult sometimes, and I'm really guilty of this a lot, and I'm trying to do better, is kind of the big, broad, sweeping generalizations in talking about, well, native plants are just better. And like, well, it depends. I think sadly, the answer to most questions is going to be it depends. And so for us, you know, again, it's about the right kind of native plant for the right place. That's what's gonna really build on your landscape over time and be most supportive, because we realize that there are some native plants that are generalist species and other native plants that are very specialized in their growing situation and scenario. So it really kind of comes down to the right plant in the right place, and then recognizing what your soils are like. That's really, really important.
Excellent. Yeah, I think all of those, I agree with everything that was said. I mean, so what we've seen here at Soil and Water Conservation with urban soils is that, yeah, there are some areas where there's construction happening, where there's maybe some topsoil or fill dirt brought in that really has it has no business being there, and it's not very comparable to the native soils that should be there. So yeah, being careful of what gets planted where, and making sure that if you do need a soil test, or if you do need to make sure that that soil is optimal for that native plant, that you're doing your due diligence in figuring that out. So I think great question. I think let's move on to the next one here. So do non-native plants support local wildlife, and are native plants damaging to local wildlife? We'll go in reverse. So we'll go ahead and start with Sean. What do you think about these questions here?
Sure. So do non-native plants support local wildlife? Well, I think there's some examples where, you know, it can provide, you know, some plants provide some pollinator support. But by and large, you know, more often than not, we always tend to focus on the flower of different plants, and we need to recognize how the plants play a role in the entire life cycle of different insects, and how that then impacts everything else. So what we do know is that in general, by far, without a doubt, native plants are going to support the broadest segment of wildlife, just because that's the way Mother Nature intended this to be in the beginning. So these plants and animals have co-evolved over thousands and thousands of years, and when you start bringing non-native plants from other parts of the world, then that tends to disrupt things. But there, you know, sure, there are some non-native plants, flowering plants, that can provide some food source, but by in general, we really like to focus on native plants, because we just know that that it has such a massive impact on pollinators and wildlife. Are native plants damaging to local wildlife? I struggle with that. I suppose the answer would be it depends. If there's right, so every habitat type is going to support different forms of wildlife. So if you're trying to support, you know, one type of insect or animal, and your habitat type doesn't match, then that's probably not going to work real well. But I think, you know, by and large, you know, we just know that native plants do a better job of supporting a native wildlife.
Freya, how about you?
Yeah, what Sean said. But also, yeah, as far as non-native plants supporting local wildlife, I mean, there has been research done in the recent past decade indicating that, like, although you may be seeing your birds eat some of your honeysuckle or barberry fruits in the winter, they're getting food that way, but they have actually like analyzed the nutrient content of those berries, and they are just different. They have a completely different nutrient set than what our native fruit producing shrubs, for example, provide. And again, you know, the wildlife here have evolved with, you know, serviceberry or spice bush, things like that. And they are just calorically different. And so that, you know, has implications for actually providing less quality of food for our native wildlife. So even though it looks like you're providing for the wildlife, you're potentially not. And so there's just another, you know, there's all sorts of pieces out there like that, that non-native plants, although they potentially, you know, might provide something, the native plants are most likely doing a better job, just like Sean said. And then, yeah, native plants damaging to local wildlife. No, but again, you know, like what Sean said, it depends. You know, and it also depends on, like, if, you know, I mean, and this is, you know, in larger native natural areas, you know, whether or not, you know, what you hope to see there, if you're using prescribed fire, or if not, if that's an appropriate thing for that area. There's a lot of components to take into account when, you know, so, but more than likely, no.
I mean, great points there. I mean, I'm not really exactly sure where that myth or mindset came from, where native plants would be damaging to a local wildlife. It's a really interesting question to kind of think about as well. But yeah, let's keep going. I think, Marissa, you're next?
Yeah, so I use some, I guess it'd be non-native things in my, or like around my vegetable garden, especially to attract beneficial insects. So like I will plant buckwheat as a cover crop, crimson clover. I use sweet alyssum as kind of a ground cover. And a lot of these flowers that are very small, you know, some of like the daisy shape, like with the dill, those will actually bring in parasitoid wasps, which can help keep like caterpillar pests under control. So I do use some things like herbs, and even just some standard like annual plants in and around my vegetable garden in particular to help bring in beneficials. Primarily wasp species are kind of what I'm hoping to bring more of in. I know that sounds crazy, but I enjoy the wasps in my garden because they really seem to help with pest control, especially caterpillar problems. And in terms of native plants being damaging to the local wildlife, I would have to agree that I don't think they are. Although it depends, like Sean said, we'll probably keep going back to that. I have a royal catchfly planted in my garden, and it's a very sticky plant. And it was either last summer or the summer before, I was out looking at it, and I think it may be one of those plants that maybe like exudes the sap a little bit, so everything gets a little sticky, and then insects will actually just stick to the stems and things. And I actually found a bee that had gotten stuck to the plant. And so that was only one bee, but the bee ended up dying because it was stuck to it and it couldn't get away from the plant. So in some form or fashion, I suppose, sometimes those things can happen, and that would just be a part of keeping sort of the ecology of the garden or even a bigger space more in balance.
Thank you for that, Marissa. Yeah, great example, actually, yeah, where something like that could be damaging. Martha, and this is for everybody as well. The chat room is open for anybody that has any questions. And if you have a chance and you see a question that you'd like to answer, you can. Some of these we will touch on in the presentation as well, and we'll come back to as well. But if you do have a quick reply for any of those questions, go ahead. With that being said, Martha, could you touch on the question on the screen here, and then we'll go on to the next question.
I think it's been pretty well answered. I'd like to go back to Marissa's royal catchfly.
Yeah, okay.
It's a defense mechanism that the plant has to protect it from predators, which is interesting. But also, our beloved milkweed that everyone wants to plant for the monarchs, it kills a lot of native bees and pollinators because they get their legs stuck as they're trying to pull out the pollen sac. So if you closely look at a milkweed flower, you will see dead pollinators on it. Do you not plant it? Of course you plant it. It's just part of the web of life and how these plants want to attract pollinators, but they also want to protect themselves. Also, do non-native plants support local wildlife? And I think, Sean, you might have mentioned this, that there's specialist pollinators that need one type of plant. Like there is a bee, I think it's a minor bee, that needs the wild geranium to survive. So there are local wildlife is such a broad term. So yes, they do not support those specialist pollinators. They need our native plants.
Okay, wow, that's so much great input there. Love it. Let's move on to this next question here. And I'm gonna move around a little bit, move around the board here. Let's start with Freya on this one. We'll also, along with these questions, let's try to keep HOAs in mind as well. That was mentioned in the chat. How to talk to HOAs and neighbors, approaching them so that you don't get falsely reported, or that you could, kind of change the minds of the HOAs. But then definitely, what are some of the local ordinances and laws to keep in mind when we're looking at and planting natives? Freya, you could start.
Yeah, I mean, the weed height city ordinance for neighborhood code, especially in Fort Wayne, is like 8 or 9 inches if you allow your yard to get over that height. And depending on whether it's your intentionally planted native garden or your weeds, a lot of neighbors don't know, and they'll call on you, and then the city is essentially obligated to come and warn you about it. And so sometimes that just requires a conversation with the local officials. I personally experienced that, and if you approach it in a good positive way, they're usually very understanding, and ways to work around some of those ordinances. The Indiana Native Plant Society offers a Grow Native. You can register for free, and then you can pay 15 or 20 bucks for a sign to put in your yard if you're allowed to put up a sign. That comes into those HOAs thing. Or there's the Monarch Way Station, or the National Wildlife Federation. There's a slew of organizations. You can register your native habitat as an official garden, and that usually helps give you some leverage against some of those ordinances. Of course, some of those noxious weeds, you can't get around those, so you do have to get rid of those, but most of them are non-native. Some noxious weeds are native plants, but it's just one of those things that you have to kind of know, but there's not a ton of them. So like mare's tail, it's an interesting one. If you have that, you should probably pull it out of your garden. So if somebody sees it, you don't get in trouble for having it. And yeah, talking to your neighbors, you know, it's a long game. And as people, you know, pass your garden, some people will say, I love your plants, and some people are like, what are you doing? And it's just, you know, being available, being able to talk to people, and continuing to educate folks about, like, as they're willing, if people have questions, answer the questions, and share information. And over time, people just get used to it. It just takes time. HOAs are just a special place, and they're all different, and they're all made of different people, and who's in charge of what. So it's really case dependent on the HOA. Some are a lot more open to native plants and native gardens than others. And again, it's, you know, talking with your neighbors, maybe getting involved with your HOA board, and trying to enact change that way. And again, you just have to be more patient than the people who think that you're planting weeds. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is just help, just waiting for people to change their mind, and they may never, and it may just be a constant conversation. And so yeah, it's that's what I got for those.
Thank you for that. Martha, what do you think? What are some experiences that you've had?
Well, I'm out in the country, so just that, not just weeds, but it's that neat and tidy cultural reference you mentioned. It's our move over the last 20, 30 years to over mulch and under vegetated landscapes is what people think look good, some people. So what you need to do is make it neat and tidy. And even in a strict homeowners association, you can work in native plants in a landscape and no one will say, oh, that's a native plant. You might want to keep the more unmanicured plantings in the backyard. In the front yard, you know, plant your oak tree, plant your serviceberry, and no one will notice the difference. Put in some butterfly milkweed and some cone flowers. The height variation is the height ordinance in Fort Wayne, from what I understand, are for weeds. And if it's in a garden bed and there's edging on it and there's a mowed area and you put in a bench or some artwork, people won't view it as weeds. No more than they would view a rose as a weed.
Those are some great points. I like that. Being able to plan out, you know what looks quote unquote messy in the fall and the winter. We keep those in the back and keep the ones in the front that have a better quote unquote appearance.
Well, I'd like to clarify, that's for strict homeowners associations, because I'm all for letting our native plants overwinter and look a little messy. It's
excellent. Sean, do you have any other input?
Yeah, I think the key here is to go back is to recognize you can use certain native plants in different design styles or methodologies. You absolutely can use certain native plants in very formal garden settings that would be, you know, that I think in a lot of ways, if people didn't know they were native plants, they would think that that's perfectly acceptable way to go. I think a lot has to do with the type of plants that you're using, the type of native plants that you're using, what are their, you know, what's their personality, and in trying to design with that in mind. So you can design with native plants that still utilizes our preconceived notion of a design proper design aesthetics with mulched beds and space between plants. That just means that you're probably going to have a different level of stewardship of those gardens versus something that is more wild in nature. So that's the big key is again understanding the plant, how the plant behaves, and designing with that in mind so that you can try to maintain a certain look and feel, again, for those HOA rules that may be in place. Ideally, I'd love to see that some of that start to be relaxed over time, but it's not, in terms of designing in HOAs, it's not all or nothing. It doesn't have to be a pure wild restoration type scenario, although you could do that in certain scenarios if you have enough space. The key there is, and it was touched on earlier, the cues to care. So if you're going to have sort of that restoration space, maybe you have 4 acres or something, and you want an acre in the front yard to be a restored prairie, just make sure that the turf grass around it is kept cut and clean and is tidy. You have those cues to care. If you can add a piece of sculpture or artwork in the prairie, so there are scenarios where we have sculptures that can add a certain level of interest and help define the space as intentional. So if you do those things in those larger spaces, I think you can very easily get away with that and it be acceptable. It's when you bring that to the edges and you don't have those areas defined, then that's where you can start to run into problems with HOAs and that sort of thing.
Gotcha. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of different ways to a lot of different aspects of it to keep in mind, a lot of different methods to integrate. Excuse me, Marissa, do you have anything else to add to, or any of your personal experience with local laws or ordinances and neighbors?
Well, I'm probably not the best person to ask because I did a lot of my garden on impulse. And so like we have been for the last 7 or so years growing all of our food in the front yard. And, our tomatoes get 7-8 foot tall. I've got prairie dock out there. Unfortunately, goldenrod and cut plant have ended up out there as well. So I've got some things that have gotten a little out of my control in the front yard. Luckily, I don't have an HOA that I have to deal with. And most of my neighbors are intrigued and complimentary about it. But that doesn't mean that when neighborhood code drives by that I'm not holding my breath, because I certainly do in the summertime. So yeah, we just did a lot of things on impulse and it's been fairly well received, but I don't think that would be the norm, especially not in an HOA. And I don't know, I think the function is so important. Like people may stand far away from my garden and see what they would view to be as something that's a little bit messy. And that's with purpose. Something that's not got the cleanest lines, not the most, what I want to say, organized garden. But when you walk into my garden space and you start to look at the flowers and you start to look at the things that are actually happening, like that's where the stuff is actually going, like all the good stuff, that's where all of that is happening. So sometimes I think just bringing people in and actually showing them the things that are happening can also just kind of flip a switch sometimes. And then maybe they see that, some of these things can be really good. But it's all about perception. And like I said, I think I'm just in a unique spot where people have been patient with me or have enjoyed it to a degree and just observed and not had it become a problem, I suppose, over the last several years.
So you're utilizing your front yard to grow, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do as well in my project. Starting slow.
Yeah.
My yard, if you go down my road, my yard's pretty much the only one with anything different going on in their front yard. Everybody else just has grass. It's just like everywhere
Yep.
else.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on here. And then, so for these ones here, these next ones, we'll do like rapid fire. I'll ask one of you to answer, and then if anybody else has anything else to add, we go from there. So do native lawns require less maintenance and less chemical use? I'll start with Marissa, since you, since you're right here.
But I don't use any, I mean, I use a little bit of organic fertilizer. But I don't use insecticides. I don't use herbicides, maybe some vinegar sometimes. So I really can't speak to, just because I don't use those. So I can't speak to that very well.
Okay. And you already said the messiness, the neat and tidy view. So I mean, what does your maintenance look like? Yes.
Well, because of some of the things that we have, like the cut plant, the goldenrod, I've got Jerusalem artichoke, I've got common milkweed. So I've got some things that are really aggressive. And so I have to make sure that I'm keeping them under control. So I'm having to take the seed heads off in the fall, trying to make sure that things that, grow through rhizomes aren't spreading into places that I don't want them. So unfortunately, because I didn't plan it out very well in the beginning, and I didn't know how much maintenance and how big some of these plants would get, now I'm having to, on the back end, especially in the fall, probably do a lot more cleanup than I would have had I made some different choices in the plants that I used.
Okay. So maybe not less maintenance, just different maintenance, different type of maintenance for your lawn. Mark,
Yeah, it's more about keeping it under control at this point.
right, yeah, making sure it's all contained.
Yeah, so it doesn't swallow everything else. Yes.
Right. Martha, anything else to add about less maintenance or less chemical use?
Yes. Maintenance is inappropriate when you're talking about native plants. You don't maintain things, maybe a tree, but you with the flowers, it's not like your living room where you put a pillow there and it stays there. You have to manage it. These are living landscapes. They surprise you. Sometimes they're great surprises and you come up with a combination that you wouldn't have thought of and you want more of it. And sometimes they're not so great, such as Marissa's cut plant and common milkweed. So it requires management, primarily editing. You weed out what you don't want and control or encourage others. And no chemical use. No need to use chemicals. Herbicides, pesticides, insecticides. If you let it go, it balances out. The only chemical use I use is for invasives.
Oh, okay, excellent.
Yeah,
So
and that's judicious. That's, painting the stumps and things like that.
cool. We're going to move on to the next question with Freya. Does an urban setting increase maintenance issues?
I personally don't think so. Once you have an established garden bed, things, I mean, you don't need to worry. I mean, again, this is aesthetics. Like the only time, I ever water or recommend people water is if they want to, make things look a little more robust in their yard. But if you're okay with things looking, a little more wilty in these summer droughts that we've had, more than likely your plants are going to be fine because they're all drought adapted. They're adapted to like changing environments, and many of them, not, again, it's not a blanket statement, as others have said, like all plants are different, but a lot of them, you can just, once you get them established, the maintenance issues are much lower. As far as being in an urban setting, again, it's up to how much you want to communicate with your neighbors and the city. And my front yard is very, so I've not seen Marissa's, but it sounds like mine's pretty similar to hers. It's very wild looking with, you know, a little bit of artwork and stuff. And honestly, it's, you know, you don't have to go out and do a ton of work in your yard, and like rarely ever, you know, you watch out for the weeds that you shouldn't have, and that's about it. And again, if you are required to cut things back in the fall, and you choose to do that, or if you choose to do it and you're not required, you know, those are personal decisions. You know, it's really it's very varied. That's a very variable answer. So it's kind of, you know, every garden is going to be different. But
Very true.
yeah.
Very true. Yeah, in urban settings, they're all different. So, Sean, do you know, how about, do you have anything to add on this? Maybe like getting the gardens or the native gardens started in an urban setting. I think that'd be an increase of maintenance issues or any issues.
So you're going to have, if you're starting from scratch, or if you have somebody come in that's, you know, wants to put in a new landscape, then you're going to have the same kind of maintenance, management, stewardship related issues that any other garden would have. So native plants are great, but you can't expect a native plant to survive if you're taking it from a nursery setting where it's being taken care of. I use sort of the analogy of somebody that's in intensive care. So if a person is struggling, they're in intensive care at the hospital, and then they're just good enough to finally go home. It's not, you know, hey, they're great, they're fine, they're all done, they're ready to go, just like any other person is. It's the same thing with plants in a nursery setting. They're being taken care of. They're being watered according to their specific needs and those sorts of things. If you just go and plant that into the ground and then expect everything to be perfect, well, that's sort of, well, it's just not going to happen. So you have the same kind of issues that you would have with anything else in terms of getting the plants established. It's at that point that things change, that your care should go down. If you're putting the right plants in the right place, then your maintenance of those kinds of plants is going to go down over time and put you in a better scenario. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for that. You actually answered one of my questions. Or I should say, now I know why one of my plants did it. A couple other questions here, and then we're going to move on to some statements that I've seen out there. Can a native lawn save you money? And Marissa, we'll go with you on that question. Can a native lawn save you money?
I guess yes, if once it's established and you're not having to water, then not having to, you know, run the tap and run up your water bill. Also with like fertilizers and things, I suppose in that way it would also, you wouldn't have to be using those things.
Well, I answered the second one too. That's awesome. Martha, what do you think about a native lawn saving you money?
Well, the less lawn you have, the less you have to mow the lawn and the less costs associated with mowing. And that's money, but it's also pollution, noise pollution, air pollution.
Yes, you said noise pollution, air pollution, and time, right? The time that you spend, you know, on that lawnmower mowing the lawn. That's time you could be that could be put to good use in months. All right. So, do native lawns require less water than? Well, that was edited wrong. Then regular, you know, just scratch this off. Then turf lawns. Marissa, what do you think about that one?
I mean, I would think so. Yes, like if you're picking the right plants for the right place again. Although I never water my lawn, so it wouldn't matter for us. But people who have sod have to water a lot, so most definitely in comparison to something like sod, I think would definitely be less water use.
I think we've answered this. I think everybody's gonna say the same thing about this one. with the less water. Once it's established, it does require less water. And so going on to some of these statements that I've heard, Sean, can you take on this statement here? Wildlife gardens like bees, ticks, snakes, and other unwanted pests.
Well, and this goes to bet, where's your garden, HOA rules and all this kind of stuff. But let's face it, if we're trying to attract wildlife with our gardens, then yes, we're going to have more forms of wildlife. And to be perfectly honest, we absolutely need that because we've done a really good job in the last 300 years of trying to push nature out because we're terrified of everything. And the problem is that we need to spend a little bit more time understanding what we live with and live around. And yes, are there occasions where there's some few things here and there that we want to be cognizant of and careful of? Sure. But it requires education on our part. You can't just sit here and say, I've been involved in putting in native gardens for years and years now. Have I been stung yet? Nope. Because I understand what I'm dealing with and what's around me and how to live with it. And as long as you understand that, then, you don't have these kinds of problems. But this business of unwanted pests and you can't have any flying insects or anything that's going to sting you or anything like that. I mean, look, we've got to get over it if we want to have a more balanced and functioning ecosystem.
Freya, what do you think about this statement here?
I totally agree with everything that Sean just said. It's like, yes, they are going to attract all those things potentially, but they're not unwanted because we need them. And, like working in different scenarios and different settings when you're, out with people who have not experienced a bumblebee fly past and they are terrified, and that is because we have excluded ourselves away from those things. And it's like that bee is just trying to eat, man. And but like having that conversation, being able to have those conversations with people is great. And I think like it's just we have to start where people are at and really try to reach out and like explain like why maybe this isn't the best way to look at things. Like yes, ticks are dangerous for our health, so we can wear bug spray outside in tick season, which is most of the year anymore. But it's just it's a shift that we really need to move back away from mentally. And I don't know, I get so excited when I see wildlife in an urban environment. And I think a lot of people do too. And the more they see it, the more they are encouraged to learn about it. And and the more they'll understand what there is to like how to live with it. Because I guess the way I try to explain it, our yards are not an extension of our house. It's the interface of our house with the outdoors, and we have to share that space with everyone, including all those little critters that we just don't know that well anymore.
I agree. I think there's a huge balance that we're missing out on. We're saying we don't want the bad bugs, but then we also need the good bugs. And who's to say what a good bug versus a bad bug is? And we need them all in that ecosystem to work together.
Not quite all, though.
we don't need them all, Martha.
No, we don't need spotted lanternfly, emerald ash borer, Chinese mannas, jumping worms.
Great point. I was just about to get that. There are some invasives out there that we do not want in our garden. So keep an eye out for those invasives. Yeah, Martha mentions some really, really good invasives out there that we're currently keeping an eye on so that they don't get out of hand in our area. So keep that in mind as well. We've already touched on this, so we're just gonna hit this really fast. You know, plants looking messy in the fall and winter. It makes the house look neglected. I want to focus on the fact that the messiness, I'm sorry. I want to touch on the fact that pollinators need the remnants of these plants in their messy form to be able to nest in, and that's basically their house and their food and their food storage, I should say, for the fall and winter. Martha, could you touch on that aspect of things?
My goodness. I have a front walkway filled with native plants that looks totally messy to me. And I fight myself all winter not to cut it back. And I have to look at the little bird tracks on the snow to convince myself. If I had to do it over, I would have put different plants along the sidewalk that look better in the wintertime, but the asters and the coneflowers are flopping all over. And
But they're providing food for the birds, you say?
oh yeah, I see bird tracks all over and when there's snow. So that keeps me on the straight and narrow, not cutting it back yet. But I do have areas away from the house. So it is something we have to learn and teach ourselves. That is this messy? Is this messy or not? I guess that's a learned cultural thing, that the house looks neglected when there's dead plants around it.
Yeah.
I tell my customers, one of the biggest joys I get is removing the plants, dead plants in the spring, and seeing all the sprouts in the green. That's just such a joyful time. The soil smells so good, and
I get it. I totally agree. So yeah, no, that's a great point as well. Marissa, do you have a similar experience with Martha said, being able to have a learning curve of what's quote unquote messy?
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes have a problem not looking at it from how I think the perspective of how other people are looking at it. So like Martha was saying, like you have to pull yourself back sometimes from cleaning it up a little too much just because that's the impulse. There's a really great quote by a woman who wrote bird books, Sharon Sorensen, and she says that fall and winter are not about the beauty, but they're about the like the abundance of food. That's not the exact quote. I can't remember it right now, but so spring and summer, you know, the gardens, everything is growing, and a lot of that is tuned into producing food for insects or overwintering places for insects. And then in the fall and the winter, then birds and other wildlife have access to the food resources that were built up over the summer. So I try to remember that when I'm looking at my space, when I'm cutting down my cup plant, leaving some stems, knowing that the pollinators are going to come in hopefully and nest in those stems the next year or in some other stems that I might have. So I try to twist my brain a little bit so that I know that like the ways that I'm managing my garden are more beneficial to the wildlife, especially through the fall and winter months, even though it may look messier than I would like for it to. It's providing some good things.
Hey, thank you for that. That's really reassuring because there's a lot of people that are like, I don't know, because it looks messy, but that's the mindset that we all have to wrestle and struggle with and learn and adapt to. So this next one here, I like mowing my lawn. You know, it's my time to get out in the yard and get out there and just take care of my lawn, right? So this is a mindset that we see a lot. It's a very common mindset in society. So Sean, we'll start with you and then go to Freya. What is your advice or your thoughts on this mindset here?
So I think, you know, if it's your recreation time, if it's your time to just be outside on your own and you like that and you want to mow your lawn, then, you know, who am I to say that you shouldn't be able to do some of that on your own property? I think the thing that is oftentimes missed is just with native landscapes and incorporating these kinds of plants into the landscapes, they become dynamic. There's so much activity going on throughout the seasons in these landscapes, whether it's pollinators, birds, you name it. And I think what is lost is most of the time we're always focused on strictly the aesthetics. And, we're always trying to create that, cover the Better Homes and Gardens image, that the front cover image, and how perfect these things look. Well, that's, first of all, that's one moment in time. And I can promise you that any of these gardens, featuring non-native plants, oh, there's a lot of stewardship and there's a lot of maintenance going into those kinds of things. So it's not like it's, one or the other. But I think the thing that's missed is what happens to these landscapes. These landscapes come alive. And I think for me, I'd rather be spending that time, on my own, outside, enjoying the weather while watching the show that's in front of me that is from these native landscapes. So I think you could still have that time. I'd just rather redirect it and enjoy it in watching the kinds of things that are happening throughout the years, because you never stop seeing new things happening and new things coming to the landscape. And the great thing is now that we've got our phones here, we can learn at a moment's notice on what we're seeing. And so that's just, to me, is a heck of a lot more fun than mowing the lawn.
I definitely like that. Yeah. So you pay more attention to that, to pay attention to more than just the grass, and you'll see a lot more out there.
Yeah, and I think to the point made earlier is, we focus on, these, we're scared to death of things that can sting us. But I can promise you, if you stand next to a native garden and you put your hands in your pockets and you just let these insects, you let these bees fly around and do their thing, they're far more interested in what they've found in that landscape than they are of you. They could not care less about you, and because they've hit the jackpot, they've found what they're looking for. And so the thing is just to help people learn how to behave and how to interact with these landscapes, and it can be incredibly enjoying.
Thank you for that. It's great. I agree with all of it. Freya, what do you?
Do you like to
Sorry?
mow, Jesus? I'd like to suggest someone likes to mow so well to do some volunteering.
Do some volunteering. Yeah, there you
There
go.
are all sorts of elderly people that need their lawns mowed. Out here, there's these country cemeteries that that volunteers mow, and they volunteer around the park at Lions Park at the Covered Bridge. I mean, just open your eyes and you can find all the mowing you want.
Very true. So you can do both. You can have a native yard and you can still do your mowing. Freya, what do you say to somebody that's just like, I don't want to convert my lawn. I like my grass. I like being outside on my lawnmower. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, my first impulse is to, point out, noise pollution and that, the cortisol levels that increase. There's a ton of research out there on what this just ambient constant noise does to, the human body and and as well as wildlife. And it's so bad. But if I, go toward and plus the pollution and everything involved and just the whole racket that is the lawn mowing industry, personal opinion. But yeah, so similar to what others have said, you're if you want outside time and you have a native garden, you can redirect it and just go for a walk, look at flowers. I mean, you just learn so much just looking at a flower throughout the day and what it changes and stuff. And it's that same amount of time you can be outside and it can be quiet and just you and your thoughts. And it's just a cultural shift that some people are going to be more open to than others. If you grew up, mowing the lawn and that was your time, by yourself or whatever, you can find that elsewhere. I mean, some people go hiking, there's all sorts of other places to put that time. And so it's, and you're not just impacting yourself when you're mowing your lawn, you're impacting your neighbors. Like if you're the guy down the road at like 8 a.m. on Saturday morning, like, why are you doing that? But it's this social thing that we're all conditioned to accept, but really it's time to move away from the lawn and mowing and getting, just so yeah, I'll get on a soapbox about lawns. Yeah.
Me too, don't worry. I agree. No, definitely, there is a certain societal mindset around lawns, and turf and grass, and yeah, you said there is, I mean, really, really close to here, there's an actual sod factory or sod farm. They just grow sod. So wasting your time. Sorry. Again, personal opinion. But yeah, so it's actually really wonderful hearing from all of you guys, all of the professionals here on the panel. Thank you so much for your time and taking your morning to join us and answer some questions. I don't believe there's any, I think everything on the chat, all the questions on the chat have been answered. Just double check, make sure. Is a willow or river birch bad to plant in a residential area? That was a question to Martha. What do you think?
It's bad to plant in, where was it? What was the question?
Bad to plant in residential? Like in 0.6 acres? Will it be too big?
Oh, it's not too big. I'm just concerned about it's kind of a mess, the river birch, because it's kind of a messy tree. And so if you're fine with the drop branches and stuff, I can leave mine under my tree, but I have to move them out of the driveway.
Got it. So
So
make sure
that would be about the only thing. I would think also the water. Be careful with the roots. And any willow and the river birch, they like water. They'll go towards the water. So
okay. So if you're gonna plant it, make sure it's not near a structure that it could damage, and make sure that there's no water near it, that water pipes where the roots will get it.
mhm.
I might add, if I could add one thing real quick to that. Oftentimes when you find folks that are doing their own landscaping and they're putting in their plants and shrubs, their perennials, shrubs and trees, I can't tell you how many times I've seen river birch planted entirely too close to the house. You can't. So when you're installing these landscapes, and especially when you're looking at trees, you have to take into consideration what the tree is going to look like 10, 20 years down the road. And at that point, how close should it be to the house versus what it looks like against or near the house or in a landscape at the time that it's planted. Everyone is taking, so many people are taking these trees and they're planting them based on how they look in the landscape at the time they've planted it. And it's always too close to the house. You want your landscapes to grow and mature and look better over time. Too many times we're focused on how the landscape looks at the time of installation, and then it always looks worse over time. So allow the opportunity for these plants to grow into their space and the right way, and your landscape will continue to mature and look better over time.
Yeah, that's really, really important when you're starting out your garden. I'm learning that myself. When you're starting out your garden, you want to leave space for things to grow and to get bigger, right? Whether it's a bush or a tree or a native plant, whatever it is, you want to look at what that plant is going to look like and how much space it's going to take and plan for that as well. Because you'll be choking other things out, they won't grow properly, they won't look right. So yeah, great questions, or thank you for that question. And that's great suggestions, great answers there. Before we move on to anything else, I'm gonna have Elissa jump on here and talk a little bit.
Hi, everyone. We're getting some feedback. And there we go. I just wanted to say I worked on this. For this presentation. I'm with the Allen County Soil and Water Conservation District, and I just wanted to provide some more resources for this endeavor. We want to increase our insects and pollinators to our yards, and these are some of the companies that could provide you with those resources and or give you more educational publications to learn about converting your lawn into a pollinator space. So thank you.
Yes, so as Elissa said, these are some of the resources that we have available for you, and you can make these. This, by the way, we will be sharing this video. This has been recorded, and we'll be sharing this video on our website as well as on YouTube. Make sure everybody has a link to that as well, so you have all of these available for you. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much for being here on this discussion. I think it was a great turnout, great interaction. These are all of the different organizations that have been involved today. Blue Heron Ministries, Center of Native Landscapes, Indiana Native Plant Society, Riverview Native Nursery, Plant Happiness, and yours truly here at Allen County Soil and Water Conservation. Let's see what else we have here. Some upcoming events. Tomorrow, actually, we have our annual meeting. Hopefully you get out, you can all be there. Can't see. Oh, there we go. Barely see it. Annual meeting will be at 4710 Southwest Webster Street, New Haven, Indiana. We'll be talking with Clearwater, Indiana, about rainfall, runoff, climate change, and floodplain mapping. So come out to that. It's free. Let us feed you pancakes and sausages tomorrow. Definitely hope to see you there. We also have the Indiana Invasive Species Awareness Week. Go to sicum.info for more information. There is a Allen County SISMA as well being created. So if you're interested in removing invasive species, let us know. We'll get you in touch with those folks at the SISMA. And Kosciuszko Urban Soil Health Workshop Group is presenting, a workshop on small farms of the future with Dan Perkins, the owner of the Perkins Good Earth Farm down. The workshop will be down in Winona Lake. So if you're interested in that, there's a QR code for that. We can send you some more information as well. It's going to be a really great workshop. So if you're interested in small farms or urban farming, this is great. Once more, our native plant sale is going on. If you need more information on that, feel free to go online at our website, cowntyswc.org, and we will you can put in your orders there. You just come down to the office. We'll take care of you at the office here as well. Take your payments and put your orders in as needed. And I think that's it. Again, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for being here today. Let me try to get Go. Get everything going again. Oops. Yeah, all right. Thank you, everybody, again for being here on this Coffee and series. If you have any questions or anything, please reach out to us if you have any ideas for future Coffee and series or anything else that you'd like to talk about or discuss, let us know as well. Again, our annual meeting is tomorrow. Come check us out. We will see you again on the fourth Friday next month. We will be talking about foraging. Oh, no, sorry, invasive species, actually, yes. So we're going to be talking to someone from Sikkim to go over kind of what they do and talk about the Allen County SISMA and how the weed raiders are. Things like that. Please join us for that if you have any interest in that. Without further ado, thank you all again for being here. Have a great day.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.